Um, we're going to now turn, as promised, in rapid fire succession, to our next Fireside Chat, which features a different kind of partnerships. This is one where we're discussing working across branches of government. So leading that discussion, we have Kat Zakrzewski, who is a technology policy reporter with the Washington Post. And in conversation, we will have Tim Persons, who is the chief scientist of the Government Accountability Office and runs the STAA program, which is Science Technology Assessment and Analytics Team. And they're here to discuss Congressional S&T expertise. Please come join me on the stage. Please welcome our next speakers.
Me here today, Tim. It's certainly a topic that's top of mind with how many tech hearings we've been having on the Hill recently. And so just to dive in, I think there's kind of a broad public perception right now that Congress doesn't really understand tech issues. If you look at what's happened more recently with the Zuckerberg hearings and public perception around that, going back to comments around, the internet being a series of tubes. And so tell me a little bit about what your office is doing to address that public perception and change that.
Thanks, Kat. So first of all, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Zach. John, it's good to be with colleagues here. It's a blessing and a curse to follow like John and the secretary for a number of reasons, but it's a great time, a great place, and I appreciate the Day One project, and congrats to all for getting it kicked off. Yeah, it's, I think like John was saying, science and tech is a team sport. And to get anything through, Rush Holt's here, he's and a member of Congress, you have to do things exactly as sort of John laid out in his opening remarks. So we are here at GAO to help enhance or be an apparatus to help support that, to help manage conversations, not unlike in one sense what's going on here with, not necessarily that we're here to do policy proposals, but we can look at various emerging technologies, especially these major disruptors. AI has been mentioned, 5G is another one. In the life sciences, a lot of the area, like the secretary was just speaking about, kidney issues, regenerative medicine, that kind of thing. So I think that it requires this sort of team dynamic, and GAO has, in response to that, formulated our new team, Science Technology Assessment and Analytics. The TA, our middle name, is significant, and I know there's a lot of folks that have a great understanding all the way from John's first hearing on OTA and the startup of that through OTA and its shuttering in 1995. Way too much to talk about in that, but we're here to fill that function because, as you point out, Kat, at such a time as this, we can't avoid it. There's so much disruption going on, but so much potential for good in solving our complex adaptive systems problems of the day, and it's our job to sort of help bridge that gap of understanding. The policymakers are not unwise to the issues. They're very keen on that. That's one key thing I've noticed being on the inside, as it were. And it's just my job sometimes to say, here's what this means, here's what this is, and to help, I guess, de-risk or help frame the issues so that they can do their jobs as duly elected members and manage the risks that they have to manage.
And so how do you decide where to focus in your work? Given the number of privacy debates, questions about AI regulation, facial recognition, 5G, where do you draw the line and decide where to focus?
Right, so at GAO, under our protocols, which are published, you can look at our website and see how we start work. There are three ways we do it. The first, in order of strength, is that we are mandated to do it. So when Congress passes a law, sometimes they'll insert language and say, from such and so many days of passage, GAO shall study this. Thankfully, that's not overwhelmingly dominant. It's about 10% of our work. The biggest way, though, is about 85% is how we start and initiate under congressional request. And these are typically committees of jurisdiction, but we'll do work for also the ranking members, so even the minority party in either House or Senate will be able to be served. Individual members are also important to us, especially on the technical assistance thing, and in partnership with key sister institutions like CRS, CBO, and others, we can help provide that technical assistance. But then the third way is significant is about 5% of our work is because my boss, the Comptroller General, just says, well, this is important. And I think increasingly when you talk about things like AI, Cat, and others, you have to try and deal by subtraction, and I think it just goes without saying, there's no committee, subcommittee, House or Senate, that isn't going to be impacted directly or indirectly by something like AI. and 5G is the same thing, and many other topics. And so sometimes we need to do what I'll call large aperture work and look at it in a holistic way. Again, I think John spoke well talking about it's not just science and tech in some isolated silo. It's like, what does this have to do with tax? How does this deal with regulation? How does this do with immigration? It is a systems and interconnected issue. And so you have to think of things in a large aperture way, which is what we're trying to do. And to also sort of push the needle or push forward in a prospective way, to be more foresight oriented, rather than what GAO is best known for is typically when programs have been in existence and they start to fall on the rocks, let's say, programmatically, their budget increases dramatically, Congress is doing its Article 1 oversight thing. But we're trying to sort of help get a reconnaissance, as it were, of the topic on the land, again, in large aperture view with things across these various facets that demand.
And given the wide range of topics that you are tasked with digging into, I mean, do you have the resources to do that? There was a statistic that came out that from 1979 to 2015, staff at GAO was cut 44%. I mean, what is your staffing like, and are you getting what you need from Congress in terms of funding to address these issues?
Yeah, great question. So there's good news. We've essentially doubled to get to where we are today with now we're over 70 FTE, full-time equivalents within the STAA team. And again, we're covering a lot of issues. Think of it as oversight, insight, and foresight on S&T. So yes, we have the power of GAO on the oversight to go in and do our technical audits of the executive branch, like one we're doing now is what was the BioWatch program now is now called BD21 in the Department of Homeland Security. That's a very high-tech biodetection of select agents like Bacillus anthracis and other things. So we're going to be doing that, but as well as insight issues, writing best practice guides on engineering and project controls, which we continue to do and apply, and then also do things in a foresight sense. So we've grown a broad staff, 70 FTE, with an aspirational doubling of even that to 140, which if we hit that number, we weren't just benchmarking ourselves just to OTA, but it does hit, I guess, a symbolic mark on somewhere if you're trying to compare OTA, and I don't want to get into the details of that conversation, but that's in and around about the size of what OTA is, albeit within the domain of, again, the oversight, insight, foresight of GAO. We're not done there, though, because we know, again, as prior speakers have pointed out, this is a team sport. We know that I am hiring very capable people. They are true scientists. They have PhDs, life scientists, computer scientists, physical scientists, etc. But the issues are so complex, we need to work in networks. And I think the way Dan talked about the kickoff of this is essentially a large network, how we tap into the networks, how we build those trusted networks so that we have scalability, elastic expertise, as it were, to be able to reach out quickly so that when Congress says, can you tell me about X? I can say, well, look, we have someone on staff on this, but moreover, we are connected with a group that can help answer those questions and somehow provide maybe those one-on-one things and maybe avoid the Zuckerberg-like, the hearing that you mentioned.
And I just wanted to ask you too, because you've mentioned OTA a few times. That's an issue that's been coming up most recently on the Democratic presidential campaign trail. We've heard candidates talk about this. In your opinion, do you think that Congress should fund OTA again?
I think Congress should do what it needs to solve the problem. The key thing is, I like mathematical order of operations. The way in which you run them matters. If you want to start with, okay, an organizational construct, that's one way. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad way or it couldn't work that way. I do think, though, the reason that day one exists, the reason we have all these issues is really there's a macroscopic problem. I don't think, by the way, that one government institution, whether it's GAO, hypothesized restart OTA, CRS, or whatever, is in and of itself going to solve it. I think we're going to have to do this in a broad ecosystem of which you'll have government and legislative branch apparatuses like STAA, potentially OTA or what have you. So in any case, there's just so much to do, and I think that whatever Congress decides it needs to do to fulfill its needs, we're going to support that.
do you get the sense, given just the growing number of technology debates when we look at the 2016 election or when we look at privacy, do you get the sense that there's motivation for lawmakers to give more resources to this issue?
Yeah, I think so. You put your finger on a key issue, privacy sometimes. Privacy is huge, right? I think we sort of have been I know it's a tired thing, but the frog slowly boiled in the water on a lot of this. We realize that our data has been monetized in ways that we didn't imagine. The concept of privacy in the 21st century in a post-social media world, you have to now beg the question what that means. I still think there's, by the way, still motherhood and apple pie kind of goodness in the 1974 Privacy Act, but again, what does that mean in the context of the technologies now? And so, yes, I think privacy is a key issue. We do need to keep our eyes on that, particularly with the continued exponentiation of things through like the Internet of Things, through now 5G, and then AI later on with that, and our data everywhere. So that's there, but also the security issues, the cybersecurity issues are also, again, our attack surfaces exponentiating as if it's not bad enough. And so again, we have to deal with these complex issues in a very agile way. It could not and should not be done with any just individual government organization by itself. It's going to have to be done in a cross-sectoral partnership, whatever the issue may be.
And so on that point, do you think that lawmakers and committees are doing enough to prioritize the hiring of scientists and other technologists right now?
I think there's an increasing felt need. As you mentioned, there's a number of members. There's some Republican members also calling for more science support within the Congress. But I also know there's a nice apparatus. You're going to hear from the AAAS CEO later on, and Rush has been leading that heretofore, and so on. You have the AAAS Fellows Program. That's been a very powerful and effective way. You also have the Tech Congress Fellows. Again, you have a lot of the apparatus here working on policies. I think day one, I think vacuum's getting filled in with some of these, again, cross-sectoral things. I think insofar as the Congress is saying we need more scientific expertise, I don't think that's disagreed upon. The issue sometimes is it's hard to add more money sometimes in the ledge branch wedge of things. It depends. It takes as Alex was saying, it takes leadership, it's organizational change, and it's going to be a challenge.
And you hit on the issue of money. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about just your team and how you think about hiring expertise. How do you compete for technical talent in an environment where you have companies offering massive salaries, free snacks, all those other perks?
Right. Yeah, I don't have a chef. I know. I always say that. I can't. If it's a chef game, the game's over. I just can't do that. I think the GAO itself, I'll just speak to my agency, but I think just a lot of the federal agencies are the same way. There's a lot of merit to doing it. There's a lot of virtue in serving that, and working in a national need and having meaning and purpose. I think the number one thing that I do, and I have been able to succeed, there is a market for folks that say, you know what, I could make more money in the private sector, but I am passionate about solving these issues. I want to work in GAO's way, in the nonpartisan way. Again, something John was rightly pointing out, Marshall was pointing to, nonpartisan issues. I want to make a difference. And so in that, when I go and I talk about, let's talk about these complex issues, how are we going to help our lawmakers get there in terms of dealing with these major disruptive trends and technologies, they're passionate about that. So I think a lot of the folks I'm very excited about, a lot of digital natives now, if you could use the Gen Z moniker on that, folks coming up who understand that kind of thing. I need to tap into that creative brilliance, that networking type capability. And when I give them that, when I describe the problems, I'm having, you'd be surprised how much success we're getting, and getting very high quality people with PhDs in the sciences and the engineering, but who want to also work in the policy area.
And you mentioned the importance of bipartisanship. I mean, given your work and your focus on that, I wanted to ask you, in this tense political environment, while we have the impeachment trial going on, what are some of the areas in tech policy that you think there could be the most bipartisan momentum on in 2020?
Sure. I'll mention two, just because I think they were mentioned by prior speakers, but just to go out in the life science area for a moment. The secretary was just here talking about the organ transplant and the donor, and just the systems challenges and issues with how do you manage that? How do you provide? How do you solve? Because we're literally talking about lives are on the line. what if we, and this could be one of the 100 ideas, but I'm close with a friend who manages an institute for regenerative medicine. What if you could just hack that whole thing and just grow new kidneys, right? So the idea of what if we could eliminate organ lists altogether, right? So we need the secretary to win in terms of what he's describing. The president who's saying is passionate about that. We need to solve the now because, again, lives are still at stake now. But there's incredible work. It's almost science fiction-y when I go down and see my friend's institute at one of my alma maters, and it's just like, we're talking about 3D printing of organs like kidneys and so on. It's incredible. So I think that that kind of approach, that's a key thing that we could do. A second one, John mentioned superbugs. We're about to come out with a major report on the superbugs issue. That's personal to me because I had a neighbor not long ago who was in his 80s. He was a widower. He was living by himself. He had a great career as a retired engineer for a utility company. He had this beautiful garden. He used to garden all the time. He's very active, very healthy. He goes to his kid's house for a Thanksgiving dinner. He has a choking incident on something. He gets hospitalized because of the choking incident. And then he gets hit with what I think is a MRSA, right, and methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. He dies just from the event of hospitalizing on something that, on the grand scheme of things, is relatively minor. But there was nothing, again, as John was saying, when you're talking about no antibiotics of last resort to even deal with that at the rate of things, that's a very scary proposition, especially when you're talking about demographically 10,000 Americans a day turn 65. And that's an inexorable march over the next decade. So we are a graying society in many ways. It's not going to go away. The evolutionary pathway of these scary bugs and germs are not going to pause for us to get our collective sort of bureaucratic act together to get this there. So we do have to think in a risk-managed way. What can we do to be agile to address that? And I think, again, that's yes, you need, like the secretary said, HHS, it's complicated, you have to have this, but you also have to solve these things in government, university, industry, nonprofit, like in a coordinated way. And again, if you haven't been in the game of coordination, it's easy to say, but hard to do sometimes. So a lot of it is that kind of focus. But I'm optimistic, things like this, the mentality I think we have now, the natural bred, I guess, mentality of working in networks and scientists and so on, I think is a great advantage. But there's two in the life sciences area. I haven't even talked about AI or 5G, again, any of these big things that we're already doing work on.
And I wanted to ask you too, there's been a lot of discussion about the broad gap between Congress and the tech industry on a lot of ideas and the lack of a relationship there at times. What does your team do in order to engage with people in industry, particularly in Silicon Valley?
Right, so all of our technology assessment studies, we are doing one on 5G. We have a series on AI for healthcare. Our first one went out. By the way, we're proud to be partnered with the National Academy of Medicine, so it's great to be sitting in a National Academy space because we have a joint partnership now within academies on a key issue, AI healthcare. Study 1 of 3 just went out less than 48 hours ago, and it was on AI and drug discovery and development. So it's about how do you de-risk things through computational engines and power that we now have. When you talk about commodity computing, advanced algorithms, way more data than you can imagine, and then lots of things there. That automatically means it's not just focusing on the regulator FDA, they're a key piece of it, but you do have to connect with industry because, again, they're going to say, well, what are my margins? What am I going to do? How would I think about clinical trials for a drug? When you're talking about a ticket price of usually $1 billion just to get something into the regulator. So it's a very high-risk area. Could we use ML to sort of de-risk that? That's what we've been doing in that. But we can't have that conversation in that forward-leaning way without pharma in the conversation on that, and that's good. So we're happy to do that. Same thing with 5G. If you move over to that sort of conversation, we're going to have the telcos there. We're going to have the Qualcomm. We're going to need to discuss with Huawei. We need to do all that because you can't not have that conversation and be able to do that. So we're very much a proponent in our work of making sure we have that cross-sectoral look.
And given the increased resources that you talked about on your team, how have you seen that translate into actual, legislation or work in Congress? Have there been some tangible bills that have been impacted by your work so far?
I think that it's too soon to say in terms of what we've been doing in the tech assessment space. A lot of our oversight work does go into recommendations for agencies to change, and so we'll see tangible results following a causal logic chain of when we go in and do an audit, and which is essentially a scientific study on what happened, and we say, well, this is what we recommend to solve or fix the problem. We can count that, we do track that, and we do have just having the testimonies themselves are a big deal, because that becomes congressional record, and that's sort of grist for the mill in terms of the legislative process moving forward. There is an appetite. You might be surprised, or some might, for foresight in the Congress. They want to know, what do you think are the big things coming, because they're trying to be more proactive than reactive, and that's, I think, a positive thing, just to reinforce that, because sometimes we might accuse Congress of being just reactive all the time. And so I think we're seeing that. In our, like the study I just mentioned we released 2 days ago, we're prominently featuring now policy options, which are not shouldness narratives, like we're telling Congress what they should do, but we are saying, here's what you could do in the context of the questions we were asked, the data we collected, and so on. And so that's a powerful thing, because it's just helping the members say, here's the double-edged sword, and I'm a scientist, folks. I'm saying, scientists rarely say infinitives, but I'm going to say one here, which is there's always a double-edged narrative with technology. Always. Okay? I can always find some side of that, and I think highlighting that to the members, which oftentimes if you talk about a lobbying type function, they'll only get oh, this is going to be grand and glorious, but there's no what it might do, what it might cost, the things that we need to speak into. It's always going to be a risk management dialogue. That's the reality of everything. So our job is to help facilitate that.
And we've only got a couple minutes left, so I want to ask you just one big picture question on terms of that looking forward point that you just made. If you had to pick what the most important tech policy issue will be in Congress in 10 years looking forward, what would you say it would be?
I think we're in an era of convergence is a word. You'll see that word in the academies and reports that come out, and OSTP reports past and present, and GA reports. I mean, convergence. This is where a lot of the challenges are. We are really demanding a larger optic look at things in an interdisciplinary way. And so as you project forward into 10 years, I think when you talk about CRISPR, when you talk about computational dynamics, when you talk about engineering and merging those things together, I think it's incredible things of what we might walk into in terms of what I'll think of could be 100 years from now will be considered a renaissance in sort of like the biotech type area on that. Again, the confluence of all this massive data coming in, the 5G with AI, with life science and the ability to scissor clip DNA or try and solve problems, whether they're healthcare, whether it's food supply issues, whatever. I think that's going to be a significant area, and that confluence is really what makes it incredibly interesting. If you're just an engineer, you're going to only see through a smaller optic than you need to. If you're just a microbiologist, you're only going to see it in this way. If you just go to med school, whatever it is, you have to have all of that, and I think there's a lot there.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. That's all the time we have for today.
Okay, thanks very much.